What just happened there? Did the baby learn something? Did the mother learn something? In this video, we'll answer those questions. We're looking at the learning theory explanation of attachment here, and that is attachment explained using classical conditioning and operant conditioning. And this approach comes from behaviorist psychologists such as Dollard and Miller, and later Sears, who proposed that attachment can be explained as learned behavior. According to behaviorism, attachment isn't innate. That is, we're not born with it. Instead, it's learned through experience. Before we examine classical and operant conditioning, we need to understand three basic terms: conditioning, stimulus, and response. Conditioning means learning through experience, and that is that behavior changes because of what happens to us. And there are two main ways that learning can occur, according to this theory. Learning by association, that's classical conditioning, and learning by consequences, which is operant conditioning. More about those in a minute. First, let's look at the term stimulus. A stimulus is anything that can trigger a reaction. It could be something you see, hear, feel, or experience. For instance, food is a stimulus. A person's face is a stimulus. And then the word response. A response is the reaction to the stimulus. If food makes a baby feel pleasure, that pleasure is the response. There, the loud noise was the stimulus and the reaction, the response. So, stimulus is what happens and response is what you do or feel as a result. Now let's look at classical conditioning and attachment. Classical conditioning is learning by association, linking two stimuli so that one predicts the other. In the learning theory of attachment, food is the key stimulus. Food naturally produces pleasure because it reduces hunger. This isn't something that's learned, it happens automatically. Therefore, food is what's known as the unconditioned stimulus, or UCS, producing pleasure, which is the unconditioned response, the UCR. There's no learning there, it's just the way it is. At first, the caregiver does not automatically produce pleasure and is therefore a neutral stimulus. However, the caregiver repeatedly provides food, and through this repeated pairing, the baby learns to associate the caregiver with feeding. The caregiver, therefore, becomes a conditioned stimulus, CS for short. Eventually, the sight of the caregiver alone produces pleasure, the conditioned response, even when no food is present. According to learning theory, this learned pleasure response is what we call attachment. Now to operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is learning through consequences, and consequences can be good or bad. So if a behavior leads to a pleasant outcome, it becomes more likely to occur again. This strengthening of behavior is called reinforcement. If a behavior leads to an unpleasant outcome, it becomes less likely to occur, and this is punishment. In attachment, the key behavior is crying. Babies cry when they're hungry or uncomfortable. When the caregiver responds by feeding or comforting them, the baby's distress is reduced. And because crying leads to relief, crying is reinforced. The baby learns that crying brings help. But the process is two-way. The caregiver also experiences relief when the crying stops. Psychologists call this mutual reinforcement, and it strengthens the attachment bond. Now let's look at attachment as a secondary drive. Learning theory also uses the concept of drives. A primary drive is an innate biological need, such as hunger. We are motivated to reduce hunger by eating. Sears suggested that because caregivers provide food, infants begin to associate the caregiver with the reduction of hunger. Attachment, therefore, becomes a secondary drive, something learned because it is linked to the satisfaction of a primary need. In other words, the baby seeks the caregiver not only for food, but because that person has become associated with comfort and relief. So, to summarize, let's bring it together. According to learning theory, classical conditioning explains how babies associate caregivers with pleasure from feeding. Operant conditioning explains how behaviors like crying are reinforced, and mutual reinforcement strengthens the bond. Attachment becomes a secondary drive linked to hunger reduction. This explanation suggests that attachment is learned rather than innate. Classical and operant conditioning can sometimes be confused until you understand the concepts clearly. So a quick reminder. Classical conditioning is learning by association between stimuli, and operant conditioning is learning by the consequences of behavior. Consequences, as I said before, being pleasant or unpleasant. Both processes contribute to the formation of attachment, according to learning theory. Next time, we will evaluate this explanation.